Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Deb Hackathorn. I'm a principal with Frost Brown Todd, Government Relations, and I am also the chair of the CMC Board of Trustees. We want to thank today's forum sponsors: the American Electric Power Foundation, Bath and Body Works, The Ohio State University, and the Community Shelter Board. Thank you to our host, the Ellis, for its generous support. We are also very grateful to the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch for presenting our live stream, which is being carried on CMC's social media platforms. Please join me in thanking all of our sponsors. Today, we're going to ask a simple question with a complex answer. Could we end homelessness in Columbus? We're going to explore this critical issue with today's panel of incredible leaders. So please help me in welcoming Shannon Isom, President and CEO of the Community Shelter Board. Sheli Mathias, Director of the Open Shelter. Letha Pugh, small business owner and co-founder of Bake Me Happy, Preston's, and Cafe Overlook. Of course, the very special Columbus supporter, Bob Weiler, chairman of the board of the Robert Weiler Company. And our host, Ann Bischoff, the CEO of Star House. Ann, welcome back.
Thank you, Deb. Good afternoon, everybody. It's so good to be together. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to focus on this bold question: what would it take to end homelessness in Columbus? We might think about homelessness in the abstract as something that happens to other people in some far-off place. But today, I'm going to encourage you to think about this question of homelessness with a mindset of home. Your home. There's a book that I love and a chapter that covers the phenomenology of home. It's called Beyond Homelessness by Brian Walsh. It outlines 8 characteristics of home, things I know I take for granted from time to time, and I imagine many of you in this room do as well. Characteristics like permanence of home. Home is a place that's there after work, every day. Home is a place that's there for the holidays. Home is a safe place. It's a storied place. It's a place where you feel safe, a place that houses your memories. It's a place of orientation, the point from which you view and experience the rest of the world. Home is a place where you belong. It's a place where people know you. They really know you, and they have to accept you for who you are without rejection. It's a place where you can just be. But unfortunately, here in Columbus, there's a circumstance of homelessness that is on the rise. For example, at Star House, in 2023, we served 1,455 individual teens, young adults, and their small children out of our drop-in center. That's up from 819 just 2 years ago. What's more, there are 3 people waiting for every 1 low-income unit that's available in our community. And these are people who call Columbus home. These are people, in fact, whose families oftentimes have called Columbus home for generations. And people who call Columbus home should be able to afford to live here. They should be able to afford to live here with permanence, not in a precarious way. Some of you are familiar with the Columbus housing strategy. It emphasizes the urgency of creating more affordable housing options now to prevent the humanitarian crisis of homelessness that we're seeing in other fast-growing communities around our country. We can do this, but it will take every sector of every corner of every community throughout Central Ohio. We have the opportunity in Columbus to create options to avoid chronic homelessness, and we can do this. Some of you may have seen the New York Times article on the front page this morning. Thank you, Mark Reel, for sharing that with me. I was already planning to quote the founder of Community First, which was highlighted in this article. But their founder, Alan Graham, has a quote. It's housing alone doesn't solve homelessness. Relationships do. If it was housing, we would have figured this out by now. So in addition to, yes, creating more housing opportunity, we have to think about the human condition. People need to be able to not just afford housing, but keep it, and that's what we're here to talk about today. We're going to, the panel and I, walk you through a logic train leading up to this title question: what would it take to end homelessness here? We'll talk about why people are experiencing homelessness. We'll talk about the challenges we're all facing, and we'll talk about some promising solutions here. And then the title question, then we'll kick it over to you, audience, for any questions that you might have for the panel. So let's start with why. Letha, I'd like to start with you today. Tell us a little bit about Cafe Overlook, Bake Me Happy, and from what I understand, some of your employees are finding themselves in this catch-22 of homelessness. Why are people finding themselves in this circumstance?
I'm on my third career, my third and final career, that is, and that is housing, and it is a calling. And what I've learned as a small business owner is if your staff aren't stable in housing, in mental health, and even in wages, it affects their work life. And so what I've kind of learned over the years, back in 2009, I owned a home health agency, and I would loan a lot of the women that work for me. I loaned out over $50,000 in cash and only didn't get back $50. So that taught me that, hey, there's a segment of this society who are hard workers. They just need some assistance. And so I carried that over into Bake Me Happy and Preston's, where we try to figure out with staff, hey, somebody's not performing as they typically would perform. Let's figure out what's going on and try to help them. From that, Cafe Overlook was born. And Matt and Sang and I all felt like, okay, here's three people who have three different skills, and together we can take this on. And Cafe Overlook is a workforce development project fully funded by Franklin County Commissioners. They had no idea who they were dealing with when they pulled the three of us together, and we managed to pull it off very successfully. We employ cohorts of 30 people at a time, and we have a waiting list of about 160 people, returning citizens, folks transitioning off of public assistance. And the one issue that we have struggled with is housing. And when the housing is not stable, the tardiness, coming to work exhausted. I had an older woman who was sleeping on the park bench, then she would come into work, and to me that was a sign that something needs to be done. And I'm not a talker, I'm a doer. So a little bit at a time, I'm trying to figure out this housing piece, but I think I got it, I don't want to say I got it figured out. I think I understand the pieces that go into working with the unhoused folks, and it is totally collaborative, and it can be done.
Thank you, Letha. Your remarks make me think about the trust-based aspect of emergency rental assistance at the height of the pandemic. The eviction moratorium, we actually saw homelessness level off and in some cases decline in our community. Thank you for pointing that out. Sheli, this next question is for you. Tell us about Open Shelter, the unique function you have in our community, and talk to us about why people are coming to Open Shelter. Why are they finding themselves in a circumstance of homelessness?
Yeah. Thank you, Ann. So the Open Shelter's mission is we are an advocacy center and day services shelter for people who are homeless and marginally housed in Central Ohio. We provide crucial needs directly to those in crisis. Coordinated supportive services are also provided directly or by referral. So we provide things like meals, showers, clothing, food, camping supplies. We have outside services that come in and use our facility to provide medical care, free phones, help with SNAP benefits, treatment program providers, and VA help. The guests that we serve are typically in crisis. Our job is to listen, support, provide appropriate tools, and walk alongside them as long as they feel they need us. We believe in a low barrier approach, and the only thing we require from our guests is that everyone conducts themselves in a way that respects themselves, the space, and others, so that we may best meet everyone's needs to the best of our abilities. Because we serve such a diverse population, no two guest needs are the same. So it is important we get to know our guests on their terms so we may understand where people have been, where they are now, and where they are trying to go. When someone feels like you are listening, they will typically tell you what they need. At the Open Shelter, we interact with guests experiencing homelessness every day. The cause of their homelessness varies from person to person. However, we have seen two common threads among many. Did you know if you do not have an ID, you cannot get employment or obtain housing? You cannot get into the downtown Federal Building to get your Social Security card. About 2.5 years ago, the Open Shelter decided to take this issue on. We developed a relationship with the local BMV by which we could send people there to get their ID, and the BMV charged us. We quickly realized people needed their birth certificates and Social Security cards to get their ID, so we started assisting guests in acquiring their birth certificates. Again, we discovered many stumbling blocks to this process. States such as Indiana require anyone requesting their birth record to submit their ID with their application. If you do not have the ID, they require both a notarized letter verifying identification as well as a proof of the ID number. Other states like South Carolina require the submission of an unexpired ID. If you do not have it, they expect you to get a lawyer or a power of attorney to proceed. The system in North Carolina is so backed up that anyone born prior to 1971 can expect their birth record to take a minimum of 6 months to receive. Each instance of acquiring a birth certificate presents its own challenges. It takes tenacity, perseverance, and a willingness to truly be helpful to help an individual obtain their birth record. As you can imagine, this program has blown up. We've gotten over 300 birth certificates to date for our guests. Then there are the issues with getting your Social Security card. The downtown Federal Building requires ID to enter. Because many of our guests require their Social Security card in order to obtain the ID, my colleague did some research and discovered the Social Security office can take a medical record containing the person's full name and full Social Security number as long as it includes a wet stamp and a signature. These records are known as face sheets. This worked for a while until one particular security guard decided not to let individuals in without a state ID. All the guests that reported this also reported that this particular security guard was rude and degrading. This took months and many phone calls to resolve. In the end, we discovered that the security guard was simply wrong. On our end, we always send folks with a form provided by the Social Security Administration stating, in the absence of a state ID or driver's license, a face sheet is an acceptable form of ID. This way, we are not wasting the time and resources of our guests, not to mention the frustration of being told no.
Thank you, Sheli, so much. I appreciate the overview. This is certainly a challenge that we're seeing at Star House, and I know many of the other shelters, this lack of resources, lack of being able to prove your identity. It's an important part of the story. What I want to talk about now are some of the challenges that we're all facing as we're partnering with people in this circumstance while they're exiting homelessness. And so, Shannon, I'd like to start with you. I know we have the annual homelessness count coming up on January 25th. The annual homelessness count in Columbus revealed a 22% increase last year. The annual count, it was a 22% increase last year, disproportionately affecting our Black community members due to systemic issues like racism and classism, including discriminatory lending practices known as redlining. Furthermore, the housing crisis is expected to worsen for those earning 30% or less of our median income right here in our community. So Shannon, my question for you is, please walk us through the process of this annual count. What is it? And what trends are you seeing and what's at stake as our community grows?
Yeah. Let me just first acknowledge that I feel like I'm in a room full of friends and family. I celebrated my first year anniversary yesterday. And I'm only noting that because as I look across the room, there is no way that we could not do this without collaboration and relationships. So I must acknowledge that first. The point in time count, which is also called the annual count, is something that every county across this entire country does. And they do it, and we all do it during the winter months, or what the Midwest knows as the winter. We do it in January. Why January? Well, it is the coldest month of the year, and so if people are outside seeking homes outside, and the coldest day of the coldest month of the year, we know who we have to serve. And so we will take a day like we do every year, the end of January, and we are going to move across with not only our contracted partners, but our friendly partners, and over 130 volunteers, and score across this entire county to count where people are living that is not set up for habitation. That is not set up for habitation. And what we found is that there was such an increase, over 20%, 22% increase in which we knew at the end of our count. And it was confirmed in December with HUD, that we have a problem here. So we're setting up for it again. Now, I'll be interested to see what it says, because what I walked into this community is that, of course, there's an increase. It was cold outside, and we had more people that we could count as they came to us. Of course, there's an increase. COVID was over, and so people were able to move more. Well, I will tell you, Columbus, Franklin County, I believe we're going to still have an increase. Why? I believe that the conditions continue to exacerbate. What are the conditions? Well, we have a really healthy economy here. We're growing in leaps and bounds, and what that ends up doing is stretching the safety net. The safety net gets so stretched that some have the holes so big that they go through them. See, the holes used to be tighter. They're not tight anymore. I want to utilize this time when I am able to speak in to not talk about what people can do to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Not what programs can do more to make sure that people have to show up in 10, 15 places to ensure that somehow they get the dignity of housing. I'm going to talk about what we need to do. Oh. And so one of the things that we need to do is work with our public officials who hold collective voice. I have found that to be a very positive experience here. The second is I will tell you that I will then thread that with a little bit of forgiveness and grace. We've done some things wrong. We can correct those things. We know how. We live in moments by moments. We can correct those. So grace, kindness. It's the second thing. It's an imperative. The third, you won't be surprised, a whole bunch of money. We need a lot of money. And if we don't get this, the question is, well, what's going to happen? I will tell you, I've talked to our funders, I've talked to our public officials, and I've told them that if you fund us the exact same way that you have funded us last year and the year before and the year before and the year before, we are going to keep the exact same shelter resources. And that's not good enough, Columbus, Franklin County. That if we are growing in one sector, that is imperative that we are aligned in the other. And we must be able to fund the risk of innovation and creativity in human condition. We must. It is obligatory. When Ann asked me what those specific things are, I will be ready. I got them.
Very good, very good. Thank you, Shannon. Yes. Thank you. What are some of the other hurdles we're facing, panel, in meeting the needs of people as they're exiting homelessness?
Well, first of all, let me also thank CMC for having me on the panel, and I just want to tell you, amongst friends, I know why I'm here. CMC believes in diversity, you see, and we're looking for an old, entitled, rich, Jewish man, and so that's why I'm here. But let me, if I may, I'd like to kind of amplify what Shannon just said about the need for money, if I could. First of all, you know, there's plenty of money. It's just the distribution is not there. There's plenty of money out there. We've got 579 billionaires. Now, how can you have 579 billionaires and have 600,000 homeless at the same time? That's what we have. But if I may just go directly to the question, of course, if I had the answer, I'd be on Mount Rushmore, but I think it's two things. I think it's money, and Shannon, that we've all mentioned, but it's not, it's the distribution of money, but it's something bigger than money. And at my age, I can be perfectly honest, right? It's will. We don't have the will. If the will was there, we wouldn't have homelessness. If the will, because there's plenty of money. We don't have any trouble having a $3 million tax cut without any argument. We don't have any trouble raising the national debt up to $30 billion. Do you know what a billion is? I know a lot of you have $1 billion in your pocket, but here's what $1 billion is. It's 1,000 million. It's 1,000 million. You could do all right with that. And so what I'm saying is the actual number of homelessness, as we've talked about the increase of 20%, I can give you the exact numbers. Unfortunately, this is from Forbes to the extent it's exact. From 582,022 to 653,000 now, they're homeless. It's a national disgrace. I know I haven't answered your question, but you know, when you have prepared notes, you say what's in front of you. But anyway, to get more to your question, what can we do? I want to just give a little shout out here to a friend of mine. Lark Mallory, will you stand for a second? And the lady next to me knows what the EDAT program is about. It's the Affordable Housing Trust has started the Emerging Developers Affordability Program, and it's for those who've been crowded out of financing. And let's face it, the main reason that we have a situation with a lack of supply of housing is because we have those who have been unable to get financing to start their own business and create houses. And so the EDAT program is one that's targeted to minority contractors, to women, to those who we feel are going to help increase the supply. And so I'll end this by just saying this. I don't remember much from my economics class except that price is related to supply and demand. And the problem right now is the demand is outcreasing supply. When demand outcreases supply, price goes up. We can reverse that if we start increasing the supply. And the unfortunate part is until we do that, the gap between haves and have-nots is going to continue to widen. And it's right now wider, and the polarization is greater than it has ever been in my lifetime, and that takes in a number of years.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. And thank you, Lark, for the creation of the EDAP program. We actually have a graduate of the EDAP program on the panel with us today. Letha, why don't you talk a little bit about your experience with the program and what it's going to enable you to do going forward?
I kind of have chills. I literally have chills right now. The program, the Emerging Developers Accelerator Program, basically has allowed me to purchase property and learn about the process of development. I think prior to the program, I'd drive by an empty lot and I'd be like, oh, that lot's only $5,000, I should buy it. I didn't know anything about easements. I didn't know anything about any of it. And every week we learned different components of what it takes to put together a development deal. But what I love the most about it is we really drill down on the numbers. And so all of our projects have to meet certain income requirements, AMI. We're in that 60 to 80%. So we can work, for me, I can work with people in the restaurant industry who can afford $800 to $1,000 a month, typically for rent. And my goal is to increase the capacity for that little niche that I can't take care of everybody. I've learned that the hard way. And so I am pretty focused on, hey, I have a group of people in the restaurant industry, the whole city, who financially they struggle. And there's a range of homelessness. There's the woman who broke her arm and couldn't work for a couple weeks, and now she's on her friend's couch. That's homelessness. To, what I see at Bake Me Happy, day in, day out, the folks struggling with homelessness, there's a range, and if we can figure out how to help folks, and I think the one thing that Cafe Overlook has allowed us to do is, one, it's not just the housing, it's so many pieces. It's the mental health, it's some of it is addiction, some of it is just lack of knowledge. And once we were able to pull all those pieces together, we are literally seeing people thrive. And so then you add the housing piece into it, like, hey, I know someone from EDAP who has some apartments that are $850, $900, call this person, and that's what we do. Also, we work with each other. And so it is growing into this, it is a force. And I've told Lark before, it is probably one of the best things that I've ever done in my life, honestly. And I've done a lot of things.
Can I speak to the work with Lark? I mean, not only with Lark, but also with the way that Letha shows up, too. This Emerging Developing Program is not just a program. From what my experience is, it calls in people who care very deeply about community and then start looking at community for solutions. There's no way we're going to get out of this housing crisis without community feeling very strongly empowered to correct their community. There's something about the emerging program that allows those people then to go back into community and then to see not only what they have experienced as live, but then have all the tools to access resources. That's important. How are we going to get out of this? It will not be only through public funding and developers. You hear that? It won't be just that. There must be a multifactorial approach, which includes emerging developers. Letha wears me out. She calls me all the time. Well,
my mic on.
in a good way, constantly mining for opportunities. Likewise, she has told me, and maybe I'm telling her a secret, that, listen, I don't need to make money here. I need to solve problems in my community. Do you know what that brings to capacity in community? We need that. We struggle with housing first. I know everyone loves that. It is a brand that we all use within this community. But let's talk about what it looks like in action. What it looks like in action is I'm going to first house. What would it look like if I don't put anyone in any of my shelters and I first put them in housing? What would that look like? What would it look like if I didn't need case managers and Maryhaven and Mount Carmel to first go out for people on the land? What would it look like if on the land I put them in housing and then I did those things? What would that look like? Housing first should no longer be a model. It should be for small developers, community members, bankers. If I have anyone who has any religious affiliation in here, it should be, how do we develop first housing? And it will not all look the same. It must not all look the same. That would be an imperative that I think that would change neighborhood by neighborhood, block by block, and then look different for Columbus and Franklin County.
Amen. Amen and amen. Thank you, Shannon. I appreciate that perspective. You know, the calling that you're talking about, there might be people in this room who walked in thinking that they couldn't contribute to the solution and walk out of here with that calling that you're talking about. So thank you for sharing that. We need to talk about the greater Columbus community. We need to talk about suburbs. A lot of people think homelessness is exclusive to the inner city, when in fact it is not. I can give the example of Star House. We have a drop-in center in Milo Grogan. Only 11% of the young people coming to us, over 1,000 kids who are coming to us, are coming from the zip code in which our drop-in center is located. In fact, they're coming to us from the zip codes of all 16 Franklin County school districts, including Upper Arlington, Bexley, and others that you would think wouldn't have homeless teens and young adults. Let's talk about NIMBYism. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, it's not in my backyard. And this is a phenomenon where people recognize the need for housing, certainly, but don't want certain types of housing created right next door to them. A May 2023 Columbus Dispatch report found no affordable housing complexes for low or moderate income renters in Powell or anywhere else in southern Delaware County beyond a small senior housing complex in Lewis Center, and none in New Albany, and one each in Worthington, Upper Arlington, and Pickerington. So my question for the panel is, how can suburban communities and regional developers and builders be encouraged to help generate housing for their low to moderate income employees?
So I can share, the open shelter is located on the south side of Columbus on Parsons. We're new to the neighborhood. We've been there 2 years. And we quickly found other service providers working along that corridor as well. And we had a Southside resident create what we're calling a stakeholders meeting, and we meet monthly. Letha is involved in that as well. And it's a nice mix of businesses and community members and service providers. And we're talking about, as a community together, everybody deserves to feel safe on the south side. Whether you're sleeping in a doorway or in a house you've owned for 40 years, or if you're a new south side resident. And out of those stakeholder meetings, 4 service providers, the Open Shelter, Community Development for All People, Stowe Mission, and the Reeb Center, have started meeting monthly. And one of the things we talk about is how can we be good community members and serve our guests with dignity and respect. Of course, we've had lots of conversations, or I've had lots of conversations with neighbors who are frustrated about people sleeping around the property, garbage around the property. And so we have those conversations, and they've been effective, they've been respectful. And I think that people on the south side are starting to appreciate that if they had a place to go, they would go. They don't want to sleep in the doorway of the open shelter. And so they're starting to learn and understand that we are a community. Whether you're sleeping on the sidewalk or you're in your warm bed, we are all a community, and we all have a responsibility to each other to be responsible.
Thank you, Sheli. I appreciate that. We certainly are, community focused here in our responses, so I appreciate that perspective. We do have time for just one more question, so we'll now move to questions from, after I ask one more question after this, we'll move to questions from our live stream and in-person audiences in just a few minutes. If you have a question, please make your way over to the microphone now. You can see over here, Doug is waving his hand. If you're watching online, please type your questions into chat before we take audience questions. I have one more question for the panel, and it is the title question: what would it take to end homelessness in Columbus? Bob mentioned before the quantity of billionaires we have in our country. So I want you to imagine for a moment if Oprah, Mackenzie Scott, Warren Buffett, Taylor Swift now, and others, Beyonce, join forces, pledging to give their billions away to end homelessness in Columbus through trust-based philanthropy. I wanted to put that in there. How much would it cost? How would you spend the resources? What outcomes would you expect? And how long would it take? Bob, I'd also love to hear about the program that you and John Edgar have developed as well.
Yes, well, as I mentioned before, the money's out there, the will is not. I mean, just to be blunt about it. What people want to do with their billions is kind of a mystery to me. I'm not going to have to worry about that. But what we were able to do, my partner of over 50 years, Don Kelly, who's in his 90s, and I'm not that far behind, over the period of some 50 or so years, we've built a number of apartment communities throughout the city. And we realized you're not going to be able to take it with you. So we have formed, or what was formed as a nonprofit called Columbus Housing Enterprise. And just real briefly, it's being run by Pastor John Edgar, who many of you know has probably done more on the south side for those who are the most vulnerable than anybody. He's our CEO, and Hal Keller, who was with Ohio Capital, raised over $2 billion over his 20 years. He's chairman of the board, and fortunately we have representatives from Nationwide Children's and Homeport, and CMHA has been kind enough to lend their support and take title so that the taxes that would be paid on these apartments are now going into services, wraparound services, as they say. But the program, in a nutshell, is we're really making a bargain sale. It's not totally altruistic, although we're selling them at half price or less. And those dollars that we're selling them for is being used to pay our taxes and pay off the loan. But the nonprofit then receives these apartments. It's going to be 680 units in 3 different communities. We've already transferred 2. A third one will be this year. But the most important part, I think, is strategically we've located apartments that we built in Reynoldsburg, Dublin, and Hilliard, areas which you were referring to earlier, Ann, is not always welcoming the affordable housing. And we're putting clamps on the rent so that whatever the rent is now stays there. And those there's no evictions, but as people move out, we're going to be running it below market to those who are in the lower income area. And I really can't stop myself from saying that our minimum wage, which I think you know, was $10.15 and went up to $10.45, went up 35 cents. It's based on the rate of inflation, which they're trying to get down to 2%. But getting back to what we're doing is trying to make these units available to those people who have entry-level jobs or maybe on minimum wage. And it's really minimum wage is misnamed. It should be sub-minimum wage. But to try to make these apartments available to them in areas which otherwise aren't welcoming. And I think I'll just end this by saying, how do you make people welcoming of those people who are of lower income than they are? I mean, it gets back to the last question last week when a person was asking, why do we demonize immigrants when we need workers? Why do we demonize those in entry-level jobs and those who are willing to do jobs that most of us don't want, and not let them live in our communities?
Thank you. All right, I'm getting the signal from Doug that it's time to invite our guests to ask questions. So thank you all so much. It's CMC's long-standing tradition to take audience questions. Doug Buchanan with CMC is curating questions from our live stream audience. For those of you with us in person, please join Doug over at the microphone. Out of respect for others, please keep your questions brief and to the point so we can get to as many questions as possible. Please also keep in mind that questions end with a question mark, as we always say here. Doug, what's the first question?
And thank you very much, and thank you to today's panelists. And please, I encourage today's panelists to include answers to the following questions in an answer to the title question of our forum today. If you had something to add, please do that. I will throw out a question to get us started. This question comes from Candace Miller with Local Outreach Volunteers. Candace asks, what are tangible ways that individuals and small nonprofits can help end homelessness?
I'll begin the answer from a position of comprehensive kind of continuum of care. Small nonprofits are excellent at a couple of things. Small nonprofits are excellent at the business of doing multiple things at the same time with the exact same priority and being effective. I would say that I would ask that they lean into that with not only effectiveness of the programs which are happening and doing. I would like to see more around prevention programming. I would like to see more help on the land. But what I would love there to be, and I believe we already have some framework of this, is a nonprofit coalition leaning into advocacy. If you all heard me last year, I will not move from this. There must be laws, legislation, and reform. There must be. We cannot continue to put all of our energy in program only. We must have spaces carved out for kindness of people. I'll answer really quickly, though, on the money. This is a great question. It's going to take millions, sustained amount of money to get us out of this. And it will still cost less than what we're spending on evictions and on courts and in the education system and the loss of lives and on the land and case management and in health care. And it will cost us millions, but it'll still save us money. One of the greatest and least expensive programs that we have is permanent supportive housing, but the best program is long subsidy, keeping people where they are and giving them a safety net, like a mom, a dad, a grandma, a church, like, you know, those things that we have. Giving them that not only is the least expensive, but has the most excellent, long-sustaining outcomes, and still cheaper than all the other stuff we're spending money on.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Emmanuel Remy, Columbus City Council. Thank you to all the panelists, and we know how much work and passion that you put into all of this, especially Shannon, happy anniversary. We know the need is great. We know that your workers, we've raised the city's employment, 9,500 workers to $20 an hour, but we know we have to get your people up to that living wage, and then the ask is great. I've talked to Liz Brown at the YWCA. We know it's big. I would like to think everybody here lives in the city of Columbus, but I doubt that you do. And there's been many topics that's been brought up today, but the NIMBYism piece is a big one. We're trying to make sure that we are putting building after building with places for people to live with affordability. Our suburban partners need to do the same. This is a regional problem, not a city of Columbus problem. And so I challenge that. The question is, what do all of us leave here today fired up, ready to do, that we can start doing right now? And I'm mentioning, go back to your city councils, go back to your communities and say, you know, we have to do more to contribute to solving this problem, because the city of Columbus cannot do it alone. So I ask, what do we do? What do we walk out of here today fired up, ready to do?
I would say, when you leave here today, and if you believe, because I had to get to a place where I believe this, as human beings, some of us need help. We're not all in the same financial boat. We've all dealt with different things in our lives. Where's the emphasis on compassion? And taking that back to, you know, I wanted to answer on the NIMBYism question, because I don't want to believe that everyone who lives in the suburbs wants to be away from the city and the things that are currently considered urban issues. People have to speak up. You have to speak up. You've got to be the voice in the room that takes the chance on saying the thing that might not be popular. Might not be popular with your neighbor, might not be popular with your family, but if you continue to be silent, we will continue to deal with the same issues we're dealing with.
And I would just add briefly, I was a school teacher, and then I was home with my kids in the suburbs in Pickerington, and thought that I had it figured out, and wandered into the open shelter 8 or 9 years ago, and was face to face with individuals experiencing homelessness, and everything changed. Find a way to connect. Find a way to see them. You will be, shocked and amazed. They are just like us. They just don't have the support system that a lot of us have.
My name is Brian Urbanski with the Aubrey Affordable Housing Foundation. And Bob, if Columbus ever comes up with a Mount Rushmore here in our city, you will be on it for all the work you've done for affordable housing over the years. I'm proud to be in a community that has leaders like you. My wife and I have been affordable housing providers for over 20 years. And as Shannon and you, Bob, have expressed, finding capital is very difficult, especially for small businesses like us. Banks really can't help us. We have reached out to the Affordable Housing Trust, which has been helpful to us. And at the end of the day, we need to find capital to expand the affordable housing units that we have to acquire, not to build, but simply to acquire, fix, and furnish those. Bob, in particular, do you have any recommendations? Because we've reached out to City Council as well, and we're looking for non-traditional lenders or outside-the-box lending resources, because I agree with you, the money is out there. How do we and other small housing providers like us find that capital?
Yes. Well, first of all, it's not going to be an overnight change, but as far as, and thank you for your nice words, I don't think Mount Rushmore is waiting for me, but I appreciate that. Finding a change, a dramatic change which is needed, is one where we really are going to have to look at our total economic tax structure. And I don't know if this is directly answering your question, but we are in a situation where things are getting worse in terms of the rich getting richer, because the rich are paying less taxes than those who are in the lower bracket. And so to make money available for you and for others who want to provide housing, we're not in a situation where we can find banks who are willing to say, well, we'll make lower interest rate loans, which they should for those in need. And everything is, pardon the expression, ass backwards. Those who have trouble getting money pay more for it than those fat cats like me who pay low interest rate. And so the question is, there's an old saying that money talks and BS walks. This is all BS. How do you get to it? I personally think we need to change the mentality of those who are the decision makers. It is face-to-face. It is through voting. It is through letting those who make the decisions as to what policies are going to be impacted know all these goodies. And if I can just get off on a tangent for 1 second, as a developer, I love all these incentives. And there's so many tax credit. The latest one is mixed use, and there's historical, and there's for cleanup, and for, God, there are just tons of them. There's abatement, although that's not a correct word. There's a freeze on taxes for school abatements. There's opportunity zones. There's interest deductions on your mortgages. There's the biggest of all, which nobody talks about, which is called depreciation. Depreciation is a multi-trillion-dollar welfare for the rich, because, yes, there's physical deterioration, but the properties are actually increasing in value many times. But having said all that, I don't have any problem with any one of those incentives when they are used to provide housing or apartments that is, or any other type use which would not be otherwise built without them. It's when these incentives, and I mentioned this to you too, Emmanuel, for all the good work you're doing on city council. Let me just say, don't give out abatements to us fat cats if it's going to be built without them. Don't do that. On the other hand, give it to those who are going to build and help you with what you need. Give them all the incentives that you can give them.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left and 2 more questions that we'll try to get to.
My name is Rob Leese. I use he, him pronouns, and I've got a question about, you guys have talked about NIMBYism and YIMBYism and whatnot, and right now in Columbus, we're hamstringed from being able to build more housing. One of the components to housing everyone is we need more housing, and it's just not enough of them, or they're not in the right place, et cetera. Right now, we're hamstringed by a 65-plus-year-old law of our zoning codes that were built on systemic racism, and right now we're in the process of updating those to more modern and actually be able to allow us to build without a bunch of things. So why is it important for everybody in this room to be paying attention to those zoning updates that the City of Columbus is doing, and why is it important to engage with your local area commissions on zoning issues here in Columbus?
I'm sorry, I'm monopolizing here. Again, we say one thing and mean another. We talk about, hey, we want density, but then once we get the density, we get the zoning, we have those, hey, we don't, yeah, density's great, but the NIMBYism is great somewhere else, right? And so it's not going to do us any good if an entire community, and I don't want to single out any of our suburbs, I can name almost all of them. We can name those who are welcoming, like the Whitehalls, who are open to affordable housing, but most of them are not. But the zoning code doesn't do any good if we still have a situation where you have a referendum if, in fact, you're using the zoning and have higher density. What I'm getting to is I think it takes a change of a mindset. We have to convince people and show them a will that those who are making the laws are not those who are feeling the pain that you're all talking about. There's nobody on minimum wage who's deciding what the tax credits are or what the tax rates are. There's nobody on who can't find $2 to pay for the bus who won't just like that say, let's make it rider free. I have to get that in, I'm sorry. Let's make CODA rider free. It could be done tomorrow. The money's there. It's not, most of this is not money. I'm sorry. Oprah, I don't know what Oprah's doing with her. She only has $2 or $3 billion. Some of these others have 100, 200 billion. I don't know what she's doing with her money, but the will has to be there. And I think the will comes from letting people realize all the joy they're missing in life by not helping others with their money instead of hoarding it.
Hi, my name is Leah Boyd. I'm representing Nationwide Children's Hospital, the Healthy Neighborhoods, Healthy Families. My question is regards to the overall question, how do we end this, is with my team, we work on financial literacy to the Southside and Linden communities. And a lot of times, those who are in low-income housing, as well as those who previously were homeless, now have homes, but are one financial decision away from going back to those homeless opportunities and things like that, decisions. How do we ensure that those who do work with these homeless members, such as Star House, Community Shelter Board, even Open Shelter, how do we ensure that these members are getting in the transition where they can make financially sound decisions when they get into the housing so that they are not back on the streets again?
I'm going to answer just from the Community Shelter Board, and then as I sit in leadership. I want to be real clear that many of us are one impact away from being in a bad situation. So I actually want to bifurcate a little bit that low income and low poverty means something. This archetype that poverty then is not connected to structures It's connected to structures of racism, of inequality, of gender, of violence in communities. The concentration of violence in communities, and somehow low income has a lot of things that they got to tick off to do, don't they? They have to get trained. They got to have financial literacy. They have to hurry up and get all the things that they need, and it keeps them busy. Well, I will tell you that for us, I believe that it is imperative that first people get housing and stability and sustained and pervasive so that they can have enough capacity to do the other things that all of us need to do in life. You know, have financial literacy. All of us need that. I don't know, even though it's something that has been connected, that those that lose their home have somehow done something wrong. It's not true. That's a lie. People... I will, though, say, and we're at time, that programs are helpful, but they are helpful in alignment with what people need first, which is housing, and then supports aligning with that to keep people safe, all of us, and secure, all of us, is then the next step.
Thank you, Shannon. Well, yes. Yeah. Well, I wish we all had more time together today, but I'm getting the wrap-up signal. So with that, I'll kick it over to Deb for closing remarks. Thank you.
And thank you very much. I hope you're all asking yourselves what you can do to help contribute to reducing or eliminating homelessness here in Central Ohio. Thank you so much to our forum sponsors today, the American Electric Power Foundation, Bath and Body Works, The Ohio State University, and the Community Shelter Board. And thank you to the Ellis for its support. We also want to again thank our virtual seat patrons and the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch for presenting today's live stream. And our very special appreciation to today's panelists, Shannon Isom, Sheli Mathias, Letha Pugh, Bob Weiler, and our host, Ann Bischoff. Thank you. Please take a moment to register now to attend next Wednesday's forum, Creating the City Beautiful, featuring Dave Amos, creator of the hit YouTube channel City Beautiful. We hope we'll see you there. Thanks again for being here today. We couldn't do it without you. Please have a wonderful week.